Well, welcome back to the Azure Podcast. This is episode number 391, being recorded on the 25th of August, 2021, with special guest Nikhil Vimal. I'm Sajid, and on Teams with me, we have Kale, Cynthia, Evan, and our special guest Nikhil, who we're going to get to in just a minute. But before that, we have maybe one or two items in the news section today. Who wants to cover that? Cynthia, I think you put something in there.
Did. And this is a really complicated one. So I'm going to just try to touch the fundamentals of what it's about. Recently, we were able to complete some genomics testing on the International Space Station with an HPE Spaceborne Computer 2 and Azure. And when you think about space, like there's a lot of just physical constraints of what a computer can and cannot do. And when thinking of like bringing a computer into space, so historically, there has just been like a lot of restrictions on what the computer can do and cannot do. And of course, we're always trying to see like what are all the other places that Azure can go to. And there's a whole Azure Space Team, and there's also a whole effort around Azure Orbital. But the gist of this endeavor is that we're actually able to run Linux container hosting Python workload in space, and then we're also able to leverage other technologies like GitHub code spaces and also ARM templates, and a number of other Azure cool things to simulate first the latency on Earth of what it would be in space, and do some of PLC experimenting when we are actually in space.
I'm hoping this means we can actually broadcast the Azure podcast in space. And International Space Station can listen to this, but just kidding.
Oh, we have somebody from the space station on the call, like Nikhil is. But Cynthia, you did a great job explaining that, by the way. Even I understood it, so good job. So, yeah, I don't think there's any other news, right? I think this is it. Evan, anything from your side? Oh, you were on vacation,
I'm
so
to say I'm ready to go back to vacation.
You came with a blank slate.
I was gonna say there's a bunch of services that are going to be retiring soon, or has a retirement timeline that all came out on Azure updates. But we'll probably I don't know how we can consolidate that, but there's a lot of different services that our listeners should definitely keep an eye out.
I believe there is a VM type also. I think one of the NVIDIA SKUs is being retired. The older ones.
Yeah, we'll put those on the site, just sort of a pointer to everything, so people can find it.
All right, so let's get this show with Nikhil. Nikhil, thanks so much for joining us. Nikhil actually reached out to us reached out to me on LinkedIn, I think, right, Nikhil? So thank you for doing that.
Yep.
He's with a partner organization, and we do like to get Microsoft partners on the show from time to time. And he's got some really interesting use cases that his company takes advantage of in Azure. And so we thought we'd get him on to share those use cases so that others can also benefit from those experiences. So Nikhil, go ahead and introduce yourself, introduce your company, and tell us kind of just at a high level what what kind of products you guys build, and we'll take it from there.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. And no, it's just I've been a fan of the show for a bit, especially in the partner ecosystem. A lot of the stuff that we see is from other partners, but seeing stuff from people directly at Microsoft and things like it, there's so many different perspectives to explore in the community here. So I've been a fan of this one and been listening and thought, if I can offer some value to it, that would be a cool opportunity. I think there's some cool topics to touch on today. So. But yeah, I'm Nikhil Vimal. I'm the head of operations and consulting partner at a company called ChatMode at chatmode.io. We do primarily enterprise and mid-market deployments and professional services for AI projects using the Microsoft Suite, Azure, Power Platform, a few things like that. And that's primarily what I'd love to talk about today, is that we've been breaking and stress testing, different Microsoft products for different projects in many different ways now since, I guess, early 2020. So really, like right around the pandemic started is when we started. We got a little bit more time to to focus on not just projects, but also doing research as well. And we've discovered some really cool things, and I think they're worth talking about, and I think they're worth bringing up in different ways, as you mentioned, Sujit, in different use cases and different contexts here. So I'd love to see where this conversation goes, and I'd love to share some of my findings. But it definitely really sits in that like Azure AI framework that Microsoft has set up now. So yeah, it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. And I know everyone talks about AI a lot these days, right? I mean, of course, you get visions of all these movies and whatnot, and but realistically, what are some of the real things you're seeing on the ground when it comes to AI? Like, what are some of the really cool use cases that actually make practical sense today and are not just science fiction?
Sure. And this one actually comes at an interesting impasse even for us as a company right now, because we've been thinking a lot about the way of presenting AI, like in general, doing webinars, doing content, things like that. And one thing that we've really discovered is that it's not really that scary, because there really is such a maturity that you have to follow in the AI ecosystem, different models for different use cases that you're going to try to break. And I just wanted to add a disclaimer, because I think it's funny how many you have to wonder how many people have unrealistic expectations, or that was definitely a curiosity. And once we got into the space, sure enough, we have all these companies coming to us asking for the create robotics and things like that, and just these crazy ideas that connect with IoT sensors in the healthcare space, or something might as well build a rocket ship with AI or something, right? There's so many different ideas that we've heard and people have been excited about, but who's really funding that? Who's really actually managing those things? So it's been interesting, because one of our most common use cases is just the idea of creating approval processes, automating those in an internal workplace. We mostly work on the employee experience side of things, and it's really funny because it's not like we're building artificial intelligent employees or something. There has been people have approached us about those kind of concepts, but they really just want a simple business process moving first and automated a little bit, and then maybe later that can be the lead up, right? But it's a lot of approvals, or doing or wiring Microsoft Forms data to train a data set or something like that, which is all really cool and all building up to something, but it's taking time. It's certainly that's one of those things is we're internally as a company, we're breaking stuff, right? We're trying vision AI and things like that, and we've done some small pilots and things like that using more complicated parts of the Microsoft ecosystem, like sensors and computer vision. But those projects they haven't really hit critical mass just yet. So the learning here, the big thing that we're realizing is that even with all these resources available, it's about sort of setting up realistic expectations, right? When it comes to how much data you can handle, how many resources can work. Just a little bit into the insight around that.
That's super interesting around the when you say about it's not there to at least right now replace humans,
Right.
for things. But I mean, do you see it mostly as optimization or improving experience, user experience of these flows? Is that really where AI is being used today, as opposed to a replacement for a worker or something like that?
Yeah, and I saw it as, and Microsoft is a big, I've seen them push it around at a few of their keynotes and stuff. It's the idea of that customer experience, which I think is a mixture of employee experience empowered by AI that makes a better end user experience as well. And I think that model is that's for, at least from a business standpoint, that's what rationalizes, why even companies are building AI software now, because it definitely works as a solid companion. Now, I will say I've seen people use Azure for virtual avatars. I've seen them use it for robotics purposes and different micro machinery type stuff. It's definitely I think that replacement idea is that's out of this world. It is something people are consistently afraid of, but I think that one is still, once you get into it and once you realize how much that needs, how much intelligence that needs, it's just insane. And like I said, Azure AI stress testing is already a whole different world, but just imagining millions of data sets trying to move, in tandem in a second, and all these models with vision and machine learning. We're not there yet where we have, robots sitting at desks and, looking human, or being able to be in the warehouse one minute and be in the office another minute. It's sort of it's such a crazy template that we have to do so. And I'm really happy that there's all these studies and all all the like Turing, models that Microsoft has been trying. It's a great, stepping stone, but it's still like, it's pretty funny. That is what people are afraid of, but they really don't realize what's even behind all of that and how hard that is to spin up.
You said something there that caught my attention. You said talking about stress testing the models, and I was hoping you could elaborate on that a little bit, because when I think about stress testing, it's sort of in the traditional, I put more scale, I put more load on my system. But when you talk about AI, there could also be the aspect of, well, what if I, sort of push it with, edge cases in terms of whatever you're trying to analyze. What do you, when you mention that, what are you talking about?
Yeah, so I think it's stress testing in a couple of ways. In that particular context, I was just thinking of like when there's a lot of people that are interacting with the AI at once. That's definitely like those high volume, models that need to track things like really fast. And if there's a lot of, it's like a example would be like a chatbot on a website, right? Like the chances of failure just go way up, and being able to predict that is definitely much harder. And there's a whole industry out there that's literally dedicated to, conversation design and making your chatbot like work when it fails. But where's AI useful if it's like consistently being overloaded, just because of like the lack of finding out stress testing. Or lack of finding out like the edge cases early enough. So it really is about putting things in like a box and doing a little bit of packaging and containment when you're building these things out. And again, that comes with realistic expectations, whether for a business case or who the like end user is. And we've explored a lot of different ways that AI can work with data that's cached with microservices and elements that have like different load balancers set up right using an Azure backend. But it's still like there still feels like there's a lot of uncharted territory because our stuff doesn't get really high volume. It's like I said, it's more for like the back end use cases, which have a pretty controlled people. We can guess how much people are going to use it day to day. But let's say we gave this AI to like 1 million people in one night, right? Like what that would look like yet? It's a scary thought. There's a lot of scalable ways to approach it, but it's also like, shoot, how much does machine, applied learning have to interact with cognitive services and things like that? And piecing those things together, it's just a consistent, like, it seems like a consistent, optimization fight that has to keep going. So I'll stop rambling there for a second. I see some hands up.
Yeah, there was a few weeks ago now, we had April Dunham on the show. She's like the power guru, so to speak. And she talked about Power Automate, which kind of speaks to what you're talking about, is automating some of these processes. But how do you include AI into that? I guess I'm not able to connect the picture, or machine learning or whatever it is. Like, how do you really improve that process using AI techniques?
Yeah, so I'll say from where I'm coming from, particularly there's like, I've done a lot of work in the chatbot space a little bit, or like we have done a lot of work in the chatbot market, I guess now, which is really across a lot of verticals. And that one, Lewis.ai actually proves to be an incredible resource that can be coupled with Power Automate and also Power Virtual Agents, which is, I guess, the whole chatbot side, to do that natural language understanding, to do different breakdowns. But another interesting tool that I've seen really popping up, it definitely still has some maturity. I can tell there's different things in preview and such, is AI Builder for the Power Platform. I don't know if that was talked about on that episode a couple of weeks ago, but I've been playing around with it. And that one particularly, it's back-ended by cognitive services and has a lot of like, different ways to do keyword extraction, category classification, prediction modeling. But it's actually like it's the low code, no code type model there, where a lot of it can be done by somebody to automate those business processes. So it is getting a little bit easier. But I think with Power Automate, it's more like, we've like literally done things where we've had to like call custom endpoints, right, to call a model and things like, when it gets to, it's again when it hits a certain scale, or when it hits a level of certain complexity where you're starting to sort of jerry rig like computer vision with NLU. We have done that before. That's where you have to, like we're just straight up, making API and endpoint calls. There's some Azure connectors as well. I haven't played with them as much. Like we've gone a more traditional route, but that can also connect certain resources and different things like that, data points as well. So, but we're also seeing a way that it's also like even consolidating into the Power Platform, where all that is built on top of Azure, but you don't have to touch Azure, right? So that's something interesting that I'm still exploring even right now. But yeah, the way we're doing it is it's really like, these are like full and microservices set up with APIs and things like that, and then we're calling them from Power Automate to run different functions, building out the conditions, building out the queries, and then being able to automate some of the more complex processes.
Okay, I'm curious, when you have different conversations with your customers, is there a clear delineation between machine learning and artificial intelligence, or are they kind of just used interchangeably now?
Definitely interchangeable. That's another thing that's like, I'm someone who comes from a software engineering background, so for me, like, all these little pieces are very important. But we talk to even IT directors that don't quite know the extent of how different that can be under the Azure suite. So that has been an interest. There definitely is a disconnect. It's when we have to try to connect, but again, that's where that like it's not without building out a whole level of maturity and explaining the differences and having all these wacky diagrams and things like that. But I guess you got to do what you got to do when it comes to this. But in the end, they believe in both, but it needs to be mapped out in such a way. Even though Microsoft has it everywhere, it's still like we need to go in and do a little bit of hand holding just because of how in depth applied learning versus cognitive services versus infrastructure just gets. So yeah.
What so you talk about sort of, I like your point about sort of setting realistic expectations for the technology and understanding what you're trying to do. One of the areas that I'm seeing, like, actually, I just came back from vacation. We were joking about it earlier in the call. Came back from vacation today, and one of the emails that was sitting in my inbox was from Microsoft 365 saying, hey, you got these meetings on your calendar today. Here's some docs that are related to that. Right, you might want to check out. Which, as someone who literally am walking into meetings having not read my email, that's a really good that's a good example of something I get real world use out of. I got to think that there's other scenarios like that companies like you are exploring. And can you give us some examples of things that you see people doing out in the real world with it?
Sure, yeah. One interesting one that I've seen is and we've messed around with this one, is it's like similar to what you're talking about, where you get like documents just in time before a meeting or something like that, but they might still be like pages and pages of stuff that you'll have to read through. So an interesting one, I don't think it's like really even people have really seen the potential, but the idea of having like computer vision or OCR, like document reading, right? And then being able to compile key points from like 10-page documents. Oddly enough, there is like some need for that because people are even like, we're all very good skimmers, that's what, I think we as humans all can like do a pretty good job, but there's still such an easy way to miss things. And it's very evident that like this little shortcut could be pretty game changing. So that's one really cool one that I've seen with specifically with the computer vision side of Azure. The other big ones that I've seen, I would say that the artificial intelligence, chatbot, conversational AI use case, not really voiced yet, although I will be curious to see if there'll be some, some improvements of that in the future. The idea of being able to type to a chatbot to do like an advanced search query, just using like a sentence, like a conversation, like, oh, can you tell me what happened last week with this client, and getting, a bunch of data around that. I think that's a really cool use case that's coming up. And that's like, we've done, pilots where we've been able to extract data from even like external third-party resources, right? So it doesn't even have to be like a Word document. It can search documents in another platform, but bring it into Microsoft, right? Into Microsoft Teams or into a chatbot that lives in a portal or something, depending on how custom it gets. So, and then I think the other things too are data reporting, like report generation. That's been crazy. That's been like the idea of having AI that can very quickly, go through, do an advanced query in Power BI, email a bunch of people, do an approval process, right, where maybe it goes to one person, they have to approve it, and then it automatically can be sent out to the right people in the organization. That's not like the craziest AI type stuff. It's the AI that does the generation of the report or puts it together into an automatic, like a PowerPoint or something like that, but then it uses Power Automate or something, right, to run that approval process and to get it to the right people. And even like thinking about that, I wasn't able to even do this on that use case, but I was thinking about it where if I could actually respond to an AI respond to that email where the report generation came in, tell it what was wrong, and it goes and generates me a new one. I haven't like actually built that out yet, but I think it is possible with some of the resources available. And so things like that, it all starts with like these they sound like simple automations, but then, as you want more, presentation value, as you want more concise data points and things put together in the right place, that's where AI is doing, and machine learning, frankly, is doing a tremendous job of. It makes a little bit of assumptions, but it also can take those commands and instantly spit you out something new. And I can talk about RPA all day as well, but that feeds that data into the AI as well, and that can offer a lot of value from legacy software that we might be connecting to, and a lot of different ways to put it around.
Yeah, you just said the three letters I was going to ask you about, which is RPA. We've heard a lot about, robotic process automation. I think that's what it stands for. And I'm just curious, how does that fit into the whole AI model? Is that what you just described earlier, or is that something different?
Yeah, so RPA is a pretty interesting one because on its own, it's already a very powerful resource of automation, and it doesn't. We've actually used it in a couple ways. So first, we've used it in a sense where there's like a communication with a chatbot, and then the natural language understanding, like Lewis or whenever we have backending, it recognizes like, hey, you said this word. We're going to run an RPA query and bring it back, right? So that's one thing that we've done where it would be able to say, like you could literally tell a chatbot to run the RPA for you in a certain sequence or run one of the different models. And
Nikhil, when you say run the RPA, what does that mean? Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, like executing a query in Power Automate Desktop.
That's okay. That's what you mean.
Yeah, so like literally
it's going to run an entire process, a business process, so to speak, at that point in time.
Yep, and it might either return data or tell that it's or say like task successfully completed. That's mostly what we've been working on in terms of RPA. We have used other platforms like UiPath and things like that we've connected to something like Power Automate before, but now it's really becoming Power Automate Desktop, which is the de facto tool. The other side of it is actually just doing like quick data extraction from legacy software. There's a gray area with using RPA to scan websites, but I suppose there is ways to do that as well, where you can have it run and it can bring you back a lot of data, and that data automatically can just be fed into AI models, right? Rather than having to go and copy and pasting or doing like some funky stuff. It can neatly run different queries. And what I saw a cool example, right, where like RPA can automatically click like load more, like if there's a website with a lot of like pagination, right? It's like that's like the cool idea though, right? Is that you don't have to sit there and click. It's just it'll do that all in 30 seconds, and then you have all that data that you can use to train an AI model, and it could save you just a ton of, because that's sometimes the hardest part, right? Is the data sets, and we haven't even scratched the surface. I think, judging by what kind of tests that Microsoft is running and other major companies are running out there, we still have so much we can collect and use. But putting that together and figuring out the fastest way to get it in the first place and automatically feeding it in, that's going to be a superpower as time goes on.
Yeah, I'm curious. You've been talking a lot about like things where humans are, initiating a process or initiating something that it's going to use AI for. I'm curious, like on the machine-to-machine ones, where we have a machine doing something, and then we have something watching that, the output of that potentially, and maybe even within constraints adjusting things or making changes. Obviously informing a human, but it's less of a human like saying, "Hey, go do this thing." It's more about like monitoring and like reactive. I'm wondering, like, do you get into any of that? Is that something that's happening right now?
Yeah, that one. So there's the hard part with that one is the level of like risk that might be involved, right? Especially with governance and cybersecurity and just where everything is today. The idea of having background processes to do artificial intelligence, like machine learning queries or even something like RPA queries, it's just like it's definitely something that can work, and there's definitely different ways to do it. But having something that, like, let's say we just turn it on and it runs in the background all the time and is automatically collecting reports and then sending it out, or doing something along that nature where a human is receiving something. There's always just concerns of like, am I one day gonna wake up to like an email inbox of like 500 emails because it accidentally like picked up on something multiple times? Like, it's just having that supervision and making sure we're not overloading any circuits, right? That's a very genuine concern, and I'm only very concerned about it because I've created like very basic automations in Power Automate before, where we've had Lewis, it's like Lewis picking something up from Outlook, and the next thing I know, there's just, oh gosh, I don't even know how many emails were in my inbox.
I've had those email storms come into my mailbox. Not from you, in all fairness, they were my own, but I've had them.
But yeah, it's actually pretty easy to just have it, it's literal, right? It looks at your stuff. It says, okay, you told me to find this, and message you every time we found this in like a document or in an email thread or something like that. And lo and behold, that was actually 1,000 times that it found it in that particular instance. So there's things like that, and I will say the CIOs and CTOs of today are getting very privy to mistakes that artificial intelligence can make, which is great. And where machine learning can go wrong, where computer vision can go wrong. The idea of AI and bias is something I've explored a lot. And all of that is just like, it's fueling this, like, we need the AI to be supervised. And that's like the methodology that we live behind mostly. But I've certainly tried different ways to have it do something more machine to machine. It's just production ready. Those things still need to be really, really like airtight, and there's so much governance and stuff in between.
What about Teams? And obviously that's a tool that a lot of us use, and it seems like that would be a good spot to inject some automation of some sort, right? What kind of use cases can you talk about in that area?
Sure. So this one, we kind of got started as like, I would say like a team shop actually in the ecosystem. Now we're definitely more AI and agnostic across platforms and things like that. But particularly with Teams, that one was like, we called it sort of like, it could, with AI, with like something like conversational AI and natural language understanding. We had this vision that there's going to be, chatbots for different departments and things like that. Still very possible on that vision. It's just, it's taking some time to get there. But the idea was having, that, like, I think we were talking about it earlier, Kale, you mentioned it, like the idea of having not necessarily a replacement, but like a companion, right? Someone who could literally, like, you won't feel weird talking to them all day, but they're your assistant, right? Your digital assistant doing mundane background tasks, scheduling meetings, all with you, either, leaving like a hopefully one day we'll have voice stuff, right? Or just, typing it out, right? Like, can you schedule this meeting at this time, and use the same link across all of them, right? We've explored those use cases. We've built them in before. There's a lot of different ways that that I've personally experimented with it, but the goal was, to have that was sort of like the vision. And I know that a lot of there was even like Slack previously had people literally building out these same visions as well. It wasn't quite taking off back then. It did for some chatbots, but it wasn't really great back then. And it still isn't really quite there now. I think because people just don't understand the level of complexity it can get to. I think it's a lot of education. I think Teams itself, like, we have a lot of control with what we can do with Azure bot services and cognitive services, and how we can deploy that to Teams. Like, there really isn't, sky's the limit. It's both, it's all in the Microsoft box. So things can work pretty well. It's just being able to justify those right now, and being able to, they are big projects, right? As your company grows, as your organization grows, models will grow, where it's pulling from will grow. I'll say another very common use case is just bringing a lot of outside stuff into Microsoft Teams. So being able to automatically, having like natural language understanding understand that you're asking for something that's from another software, right? From like some IT ticketing software. Based on your request, it makes that decision. It runs RPA or something on that, brings that data back, neatly organizes in a report, and then you have it all in Teams. But those use cases are definitely, like, we're seeing them more and more. I think that, I'm even seeing content now online that's proving that. But I think it's also just that level of some people don't even realize that that's possible yet. And there's still plenty of education, and I'll be excited to explore those more as more companies become more familiar with what can be done with that kind of interface.
That's great.
As someone who's interested in exploring like something to automate, what are places to look first, and what tools should they explore first? Evan has
Wait, let me jump in, because I was literally doing this morning. Sorry to jump in, Nikhil, but this is like, I just made some changes over my vacation. Yes, I did a little bit of fun work over my vacation, but I added the YouTube link to the podcast feed that we have through Power Automate. And like Sujit, you'd asked me to do this a long time ago, and I had just never gotten around to it. I had the RSS feed, but like, I mean, is that the classic example where you tell people to start, Nikhil, or is it like shoot bigger, shoot smaller? Like, I mean, it felt achievable to me, but I still struggled with it a little bit.
It's start in the middle, I guess, is like the way I should say. It's hard because if it's too basic, people are like, okay, why are we using automation and AI in the first place, right? And if it's too big, it's like, well, that sounds like, you know, an expense that we don't need to have this year. So it's one of those things that's how I have to face it as sort of a Microsoft partner every day. And it's really interesting too that you're like bringing up like the easiness of it, because it really is like, now that I think about it more and more, even within the partner ecosystem itself, depending on what verticals you cover, depending on what things, you know, when we have to work with other partners on projects or something like that, it's having to explain to a lot of different stakeholders in a lot of different languages what's possible and what's achievable. And so the resources are, I can jump into them even, like it sometimes is just literally like the Microsoft blog is incredible with around AI. I think it's the Azure AI blog specifically, which looks in all the Turing stuff, or no, Microsoft Research. That's who it does. That's who does primarily that. So being able to show like that there is like the sky is the limit, but in very in a very cool way, like, oh, it played chess today, so great, you know, now it's the smartest thing we've ever seen, right? But it's also seeing it in the light of like, you know, that's always going to be fun, but it's also bringing it back down to earth, right? And showing like, all right, this is what like common use cases in common industries. All the case studies on Microsoft's system are great. We even show those, and that's still usually too much. Then it's sometimes we have to convince IT. And the cool part, I think, like the GitHub, you know, Microsoft like world, I guess. I mean, maybe it is its own ecosystem or something. That's been incredible lately, actually, just from an IT standpoint, to show that like, hey, there's templates we can use. There's different there's Python for AI, right? There's all these different things that literally help you deploy better apps with Azure and better apps on a Microsoft environment. Sometimes it's as simple as going there, right? And just showing like the right technical people that, you know, there are scalable infrastructures that are being battle tested by the company that built them. Do not fear. There is that focus. So, and then at the end, sometimes it's just building out those like basic prototypes and having to, you know, literally show a clean demo or something like that. So the resources, they come out in a lot of different ways, but it's usually like, it starts with the, you know, the classic, like, show us some reports, show us why it's growing, show us where it's useful, case studies. And then it gets a little bit more like, you have to like play around with it, right? Sometimes it's like sending a YouTube video where so they can see it in person. Sometimes it's just being able to create like a basic flow and showing that it's, you know, this like Power Automate is calling Azure and doing this whole thing. And then also just showing like the development resources behind it. Oddly useful, and it's even powerful for us, but even just like I said, talking to other partners who are building products, you know, as we are, maybe for different sectors, or, you know, maybe a little more simple, we can show them that, hey, there is like AI stuff ready though, and that, you know, you might have to dig a little bit on GitHub to find it, but it works in multiple different languages. There's like frameworks, there's resources. So it's like, it's showing that there's like the possibilities, and there's also the resources to achieve the possibilities, right? I think that's a little bit of the two-parter there, and it's that's been pretty uniform, I would say. But like I said, just depending on industries and context and all that too.
But in terms of the tool set, I guess you know, Power Automate Desktop, I think, is the place where some people might want to start, and just to get their hands dirty, so to speak.
I think even better than that, I don't know if it's like ready for it yet. I think it is, but it would be AI Builder, actually. I think could be like the simplest way. If I was just like wanting to start with a basic process flow, I think that will be what a lot of people will be drawn to. I think frankly Power Automate too. But I'm curious, like in terms of just allowing people to see more of like AI in its like purest form, where you can see data sets and live learning. That's one thing. Power Automate, you know, there's just a ton of possibilities. It's not all AI, right? So I think it'll have a little bit of different, you know, context depending on who's going into it. But I would say that, and Power Automate Desktop, I hope it gets a little easier. It still has, I think it's still considered beta, or like just like a very early general access. So it has a lot of bugs. It has a lot of things that it needs to be fixed, but it certainly does feel, I mean, that's like RPA, which sounds like the that's automation for you, I guess, right? Which, yeah, in theory could be really good as well. But yeah, definitely before jumping into some of the like broader Azure AI concepts, I think AI Builder will be the platform where you can start with that low code, no code, ideation process.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nikhil. This has been a wealth of information, and you shared a lot of perspective with us on a topic that at least I didn't know much about. So appreciate you sharing all of that.
Yeah, no problem at all.
If you have any links and resources you'd like to share with our listeners, please feel free to send them over to me, and we'll add them along with the recording of the show.
Sure.
And Evan, sorry, you wanted to say something about?
Yeah, I was going to reiterate
out?
I was going to reiterate your thanks, then also remind the rest of the audience. Nikhil, you can speak to it at this point. Like, this wasn't a painful experience.
No.
We watched your face during this. There wasn't lots of pain, and so if we've got other subscribers that are interested in coming on, talk about whatever topic, around in the Azure world, we'd love to have them on. So spread the word to anybody, pass it on to your friends, right? All that kind of stuff as well. And again, if you don't believe me and you're just listening to the audio, go watch the video. He was smiling for the whole show.
It was a pleasure. It was an absolute pleasure. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.